Top Med Talk.
Well, hello and welcome to Top Med Talk. We're here in Prato, Italy for the 7th Collaborative Clinical Trials in Anaesthesiology, which is a phenomenal meeting. We've been here before in the past. I believe it was in 2019 where we recorded some excellent interviews. You can go back on topmedtalk.com and find those. I'm Desiree Chappell. I'm your host of Top Med Talk, and I'm joined by my co-host, Kate Leslie and Mike Grocott. Hello and welcome back.
Hi, Desiree.
Thank you so much for joining me again, Kate. Kate's new voice here on Top Med Talk as a host. So she's been a Top Med Talk fave, as I like to say, for years now. But thanks for joining me as my co-host. That's great. And Mike, how are things?
Very good. Fantastic morning. Really interesting morning here.
Yeah, all good stuff, which I'm sure we're going to be covering over the next couple of days for sure. We wanted to dive right in and introduce our next guest. We have the privilege and honor to welcome Kirsten Bibbins-Domingo, who is an epidemiologist and physician and editor-in-chief of JAMA and the JAMA Network. Kirsten, thank you so much for joining us.
It's a pleasure. It's a pleasure.
Yeah, for our listeners, why don't you tell us a little bit more about yourself?
Sure. I am a general internist and have spent most of my career at the University of California, San Francisco as a researcher in prevention of cardiovascular disease, as a clinician. As I like to say, I spent most of my professional life trying to get into JAMA, not knowing anything about JAMA. And then 2 years ago, almost 2 years ago now, I made the decision to go on leave from UCSF and to become the editor-in-chief of JAMA and then the 13 journals that are the JAMA Network. So a big shift in my career, not one that I had the background for, really. I had never been an editor before, but I have been somebody who's really interested in science and how science influences how we practice medicine, and certainly about how important journals are to making sure that science influences the practice. So having the opportunity to lead a large network and an important journal seemed like a great opportunity at the time. And it was really post-pandemic where there's like, what else can we do to get to do what we're trying to do better? So it seemed like an opportunity. It's been really a lot of fun. And it's been great fun actually getting to go to different scientific communities, different clinical communities, and understand what are the issues that are most important. And I've really had a wonderful time here in Prato. Yeah. Well, it's been wonderful to have you here. This is a group of anesthesiologists and intensive care medicine physicians, pain physicians, statisticians who give us great talks. What were you sort of hoping to learn and to teach us at this meeting?
Right. Well, and thank you all for having a lowly general internist also in your midst.
It's not like that at all now.
Well, what's really interesting, I think, when you go to different communities, disciplines, as well as when you go to ones that really have a deliberately global meeting like you're having here, is that you begin to understand how science is sort of conducted in the same way, no matter where we are, and then what features are really about the culture and the collaborative spirit and people thinking about problems in very similar ways and then creating change within their discipline. That's one of the things that I'm really interested in as a general journal, is that we learn from different disciplines. I had become familiar early on with a lot of the collaborative work in Australia to do trials through our publications in critical care. And that made me think a lot more about, well, that is something I can't even imagine us having the same types of networks in the U.S. in the same way. So in what ways can we learn from that? And so I think that's been part of my desire to go traveling from one discipline to another, especially those that are really have these types of global collaborative networks, to see, why does it work? How do the exchange of ideas happen? How do we bring the next generation into these big collaborative communities? How do we make sure they're multidisciplinary in their own way, even though we're focused on anesthesia and critical care? And so it's been really fun.
Well, we really enjoyed your talk yesterday at the Platform Trial Masterclass.
Yes.
JAMA's got a great record in our publishing work from platform trials, but you also highlighted some of the challenges for journals in publishing that work. Would you like to tell our listeners a bit about that?
Sure. I think platform trials are something that were around before COVID, but certainly during the pandemic, we knew much more, and they were part of the reason why we had such great science to start to inform what we were doing. I think as a journal, we have to figure out in these situations where there is innovation and there's a need to get innovative ways of studying out to communicate to a broad audience how we're doing that. That's precisely the job of a journal. We need to be able to understand a new methodology so we can vet it and make sure, what they're telling us, those are actually valid findings. But then we're communicating not just to other scientists. We're communicating to clinicians and to health policymakers and to people who are making decisions about their hospital system and what they should do. And so to me, the job of a journal is to do what we've historically done, is to vet the science and give it a stamp of approval that this finding is valid, but then to also be able to publish it in a way that the graphics are more clear and the language is more clear, and that we use other things like the podcast and the multimedia to really make sure that others who need to know but don't want to read every detail of the methods section about those results. And I think the platform trials is a good example of trying to be there to do that well.
Yeah, I guess the JAMA network and Top Med Talk are on the same page.
I love it. I love it. That's where we land as well, yeah.
And you were telling us both yesterday and today about some of the things under your leadership above and beyond publishing the journal. So I think that the Summit series that you've kicked off, can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Sure. So, I think historically maybe people have an image of the journal that, we're just waiting for you to send us our best science and then we're going to figure out whether it's good and publish it. But some of the issues that we're all engaged with, either clinically or scientifically, are issues that really require many different parts of our biomedical ecosystem to come together and say, well, gosh, how could we all do this better? Usually these are big questions that we've all wrestled with. How do we take evidence and actually bring it into practice? How is AI going to transform how we do practice? We have many public health questions or other things we're thinking about, where we think the role of a journal could also be to convene people to start these discussions. And not that we want to then deliver the solution. That would not be the right thing. But we can be a facilitator of the discussions in person in the same way we hope to be on the pages of our journal. And so that's what we did with the JAMA Summit. We first convened around clinical trials. How can we make sure that the randomized evidence we know is so important actually does influence the practice and reaches patients, because we all ultimately want to improve patient care. And so we started first gathering people from all the different sectors involved in creation of evidence as well as the practice of medicine to talk about, well, why don't we do this as well as we'd like? What are the barriers? What could we do in a year or 2 or 3 that would actually help randomized evidence inform practice in a better way? We found some themes, and luckily this theme resonated in general for many people. And what we hope to do now is to publish on this. We've commissioned some work, but we also are going to put out an open call for papers just to learn from others and about how they are doing work in their practice settings within their networks that hopefully moves more seamlessly from evidence generation to changing practice. And I'm really pleased to see so many of the presentations today at the meeting. I think really spoke to some of the things that we're interested in.
So kind of the journal is a catalyst for changing the environment in which we'll work. Can you give us a sneak peek about what might be coming next over the horizon in that series?
I think we are going to delve deeper into what are the types of trial designs and where's the innovation in the trial designs and what are the features of those and how could we encourage more of that. That's a good example where we commissioned work in this area, but we also want to see others who are actually have trials to send us papers that are examples of those. I think that would be good. Others might be, how do we think about, we've talked a lot this morning about the different regulatory bodies, the ethics review boards. How can that structure, which looks very different from what we expect in clinical practice to what we do in research, where are there opportunities to shift those? How can we align financial incentives? We're really interested in the global comparisons because we learn a lot from what works in one setting and might be a useful insight for others. And so stay tuned. I think you'll see it sooner rather than later, and hopefully others will get involved with the conversation.
We'll look out for it.
Absolutely.
You've had an interest in health equity and global health, I think, from the beginning of your career. Can you tell us about what you did in your clinical work in that area and then what you're bringing to JAMA?
Sure. Well, I practice in a resource-limited setting right squarely in the middle of San Francisco. It's the public hospital. We're the trauma center for the city and county of San Francisco. I've had many opportunities, even in my career within UCSF, to move to other practice settings, but it is the one, I have to tell you, where my colleagues hold me accountable. They say, well, sure, that paper was published, but is it going to change the work for my patients here? And it's very mission-driven work, as it often is in these types of practice settings. And so it's always in the back of my mind, how do we think about the work that we're doing and its impact for all of the patients we hope to serve? I have to say, I still fly back to San Francisco and they let me show up in clinic a few times a month. The residents are taking care of patients, but it sort of infuses a lot of how we think about which populations are represented in a study that's coming into us. How can other people give context around this and think about its applications in many different types of settings? How are we thinking about who's in our room and making decisions? Because, journals have a lot of power and we have to think about equity from a variety of different lenses to make sure that we're doing the work in the best way possible. And it's a journey. I don't want to be the one holding equity for the network, but I do think that it's something that we need to infuse in sort of everything that we're doing.
It's an interesting journey of a piece of work, and unfortunately, the publication is near the end, and you've got you've got a limited opportunity to affect the design of trials, and even the regulatory authorities and the hospital credentialing and so forth. So how's JAMA going about trying to get submissions that are properly designed with respect to equity?
Thank you for that important insight that journals are at the end, because people often say, well, journals should do this, they should demand. And it is true that journals have a critical role. But we are at the end, right? And so you could say, well, funders should do that, and the institutions that are ultimately housing this type of work should do it. And what I found in many of the things that we, pull our hair out and saying it doesn't quite work the way we want it to, it's that it's sort of everyone should do it and everyone sort of thinks it's important, but nobody has responsibility for doing it. And so journals absolutely have a role. We do scrutinize to say, well, which populations are being studied and how do they relate to the populations to whom you hope these results apply? But it's very hard to say we will never accept work if it's not leading with health equity. That's a very hard decision, but it is something we talk about a lot in manuscript meetings when we make a decision. If we think that a result is important enough that we should publish it, we are very eager to get other voices in to talk about what the implications might be or why this shortfall is important for certain patients. So I think we have to do our part. I'm not trying to let us off the hook, but I think everybody else has to do their part too, if this is the goal that we have.
So it's so very important. So I'm from Kentucky and practice there clinically in a community-based setting. So it's very, you have to be very thoughtful about some of those things about where the study, how it was designed and how it affects my patients and in a rural community setting versus a large academic institution or larger settings like that. So
absolutely. I'm going to talk this afternoon about a committee that I was on. And I think, the rural practice settings are oftentimes, certainly in the U.S., one of those that they are so different, both in terms of the setting, but also the access to many other things that really then inform when you do this intervention, well, you can do it because I know that, So I also work in a resource-limited setting, and I have a lot more people in the hospital where I am, and I'm sitting next door to many other types of things, which rural settings oftentimes don't. And so there are many features of that we have to think about. Not all are critically important for all questions. And so you can't have the ideal where we've addressed all of these issues in every single study, but we have to have an eye towards that and to understand where a particular result might not play itself out in the same way in a different setting.
Yeah.
Before we let you go, I'm really interested in a personal reflection on the transition from practicing clinician and department chair, brackets in San Francisco, to full-time journal editor pretty much in Chicago. I mean, how has that been personally?
Well, people get horrified when I say I actually split my time between the two. So I'm spending too much time in the air going back and forth. But I actually quite like it right now. I think I wish more people understood how journals work, more people in clinical settings and academic settings understood how journals work, because it's always amazing to me. It's so important to what we do, but we oftentimes don't know how it works. I also think, though, that journals and journal editors can get pretty insulated from other things if they're not also part of the academic communities and the clinical communities that they seek to write for. or publish for. And so right now for me, it's been a learning experience. I'm really energized by what I think is possible, but I'm very happy living in both worlds right now, at least a little bit, because I think it suits what I hope will allow some avenues to hopefully, continue to work towards our goals of continuing to improve in this way.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Well, Kirsten, I know we could continue to talk to you for ages. I have a ton more questions. I love what you were saying. You want more people to understand how journals work and the details of that. So maybe we can have another chat about that in the future. Fantastic. Thank you so much. Thanks for joining us here in Prato and joining us here on Top Med Talk.
Wonderful. Thanks for having me.
All
Thank
right.
you so much.
Thank you so much. Cheers.
Top Med Talk.
Thanks for downloading Top Med Talk. Don't forget to subscribe, check us out on YouTube, and of course on social media. We're on Instagram, Facebook, and X. Also, it's important to remember that Top Med Talk is the broadcasting arm of EBPOM, Evidence-Based Perioperative Medicine. We'd love you to find out more about that, and the way to do that is ebpom.org. Check out our website and find out about some of the incredible conferences we're going to be arranging across the year. ebpom.org.